Today we've got another episode of Deep Quotes with myself, D, and
Cast.
so it's just the two of us today. We're going to be talking about a quote from Bertrand Russell. Quote, "Men are born ignorant, not stupid. They are made stupid by education." End quote. So I feel like there's a lot of truth to this, but at the same time, it's ridiculous and antithetical. What do you think?
I would agree that there are kernels of truth to it. And I think there is a point to be made, especially when taken in context of when Bertrand Russell lived.
And when was that?
He was born in the late 1800s and died sometime mid 1900s, I think.
Okay, so around the turn of the 18th century, around 1900. 20th century, sorry.
The 20th century, yes.
So around the 20th century, education makes you stupid, basically.
Not so much that it makes you stupid. I think when it comes down to it, the education at the time, especially when he was a younger man, so around the time of the World Wars, there was a lot of, I guess, a lot of what was being taught in school was meant to further agendas and to get people to not so much think for themselves, but to think according to what the
government consensus was.
The government consensus, and also just like, don't think for yourself because you don't know what's right for you.
And I think that that's the point that he's trying to get at is that depending on the school that you go to, a lot of schools will teach you basically more of memorization. They don't teach you how to do problem solving. They just say, you need to know certain pieces of information. Don't decide what those pieces of information are. We're just going to tell you the pieces of information, and we expect you to basically memorize them and be able to recite them. And particularly around the turn of the century, during industrialization and heavy industrialization, children and young people that were just coming out of either high school or even not getting a high school education were expected to be able to work on the machines, and they were educated to the point where they would be able to work on those machines and not necessarily any further.
Yeah. And there is definitely things to be gained by having automatons doing the work that didn't really question what was going on around them, or as little as possible.
If you have robots that are questioning everything before they do it, it's going to take a lot longer for them to complete the task.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, especially at that point in time, they would start thinking, well, I was taught how to work on this machine, but people consistently lose fingers or arms or hands to these machines. Is that really worth it? Do I deserve some sort of
compensation
should this happen, or just because of the risk of it happening is there, should I be compensated for that risk?
Well, and I think it's a little more than that. It's if you're working on a machine, that's what you're able to do. Education should be preparing you to work on a variety of things or on a variety of tasks rather than one specific one. I mean, there is something to be said for trade education, where maybe you get an apprenticeship to learn something about a specific trade. But I think the point that he's making here, where with that people are made stupid by education, is the fact that you are being actively taught what not to think. That by focusing on a particular area and only that particular area, you're being told what is not important by what is omitted from the teaching.
Yeah.
It also depends on what the education is. I think that trade education is very specific and it's critical. But general education is important on teaching you how to think. And then, in at least the United States, I believe that elementary school, middle school, and high school really are teaching you more of how to learn, how to think.
Yeah, there is definitely, I mean, I think back to elementary school, and there was definitely a lot of just memorize these things. But I think it went past just memorize these things. It was memorize these things so you have the background knowledge necessary to then use such and such problem solving skill in such and such situation.
Exactly. You're trying to learn the problem solving skills and give yourself enough information that you can properly interpret the world. That's what that's what a proper education should be, is giving you the ability to interpret the world. Then college or trade education. The reason that when you go into college, you pick a major, or at least you should be picking a major, not just blindly going to college, because then you're just wasting your money. You should have a major in mind so that you are learning more about a particular area of expertise so that you can then become employed there. That's what the education should be. Or in the case of a trade, if you get an apprenticeship, or if you're learning specifically about welding, because at least in modern times, welding is something that is in pretty high demand. That's a specific education. Everything leading up to that, so elementary school, middle school, and high school, you're learning the background of how to learn what you will eventually be doing without having made that decision. And then your trade education or college education is learning the specifics about what you want to be working in.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and that's why I really wanted to point out, when taken in the context of the time, it makes sense. If this quote hadn't existed and someone this year came out and said it, I would take a lot more of a stance against it, because I do think things have changed significantly for the better in how education happens in many cases. I will not say all cases, but in many cases across the U.S. and what I know of
I
most other
disagree.
countries.
I completely disagree. I think it's just as relevant today, but for different reasons. So when this came out, it was around the time of heavy industrialization in the United States. And
Western Europe.
And Western Europe, yeah. In the Western nations.
So one thing to add, because it is important, I believe Bertrand Russell was British, not American.
In the West. And that includes Europe and the United States, essentially, or North America. So at that time, people were being educated, theoretically, to be more serve your country. It's an oversimplification, but you're expected to contribute. We're educating you to the point of being a contributing member of society. And we're similar today, particularly in the universities, though. I think that the universities are going backwards. Perfect example of what the term safe space means. What a safe space used to mean is a place that is safe to express any idea. That's what a safe space originally meant in the context of a college or a university. Now, a safe place is a place that you can go to be sheltered from ideas that you find particularly scary or intimidating or triggering. So those have flipped, and people are being educated through the universities to avoid ideas. And it's, like we mentioned before, a proper education is preparing you by giving you information so that you can interpret the world, and then eventually learning something about a specific trade so that you can become a professional or an expert in that area. Now, education is about showing you how to work in the world, but by avoiding as much as possible, at least in terms of colleges that are implementing safe spaces. That's what they're doing.
I don't fully agree with that. I do agree that the world itself should not be one large safe space where you are free from any dissenting opinions, because that would just be terrible in terms of any sort of discussion. I think that safe spaces as a concept in today's world, what they mean are, as long as they're not encompassing the entire campus and instead are a certain location where, if you feel like you are being actively attacked by other people's ideas, if you feel like you are, if someone is using hate speech towards you in one way or another, having a space where you can be free of that, it makes sense. I think, beyond just go there to be supported and know that you aren't going to be attacked while you're there.
But there's a big problem with what you're saying, and I'm going to bring this back into the quote. The first part of that is, men are born ignorant, not stupid. The way you get out of ignorance, and ignorance meaning to not know about something, to ignore it, or to have ignorance of it,
Mm-hmm.
In order to get away from that ignorance, you need to learn things and be exposed to ideas, even if those ideas scare you. The idea of hate speech is not speech that is hateful. It can also be, I think, equally interpreted as speech that I hate, because it's if I view something that someone else says as being hateful, it's because I interpret it as hate. But that means that I am the one that is interpreting it as being hateful. So it's speech that I hate.
I mean, it is a matter of it's relative entirely.
But
What
that's
you're
the
saying
point.
isn't wrong.
Hate speech is a matter of perspective. One person can say something and not have it be hate speech according to them or according to their interpretation, whereas someone else may think that it's hate speech. But it comes from the idea of, if speech that you hate is something that you don't know about or that you're not generally exposed to, by hiding yourself from that speech, you are voluntarily ignoring the information and you're making yourself be ignorant. That's why education, or particularly when educational institutions implement safe spaces to protect you from anything, including what people would call hate speech, you are protecting them from ideas, which means that they're exposed to less information and they are by definition becoming more ignorant.
So my argument, though, is not that people should be in a permanent safe space. I'm saying that safe spaces should be around so that you don't always have to be surrounded by things or speech or people that you feel are hating upon you.
To be able to take a break from the stressors of life,
right.
Basically.
That's why I'm saying an entire college campus should not be a safe space. But having areas set aside where if you feel like you are being hated upon at every moment, no matter where you go, going to a location where you can feel safe, having that space to feel safe, not permanently, but go there, collect your thoughts, get some support, get all of that before you go back out into the world, hearing those opinions, not so much that
in a controlled circumstance.
Right. And so I think having spaces set aside that says this is just somewhere where you can be safe from whatever else is going on, and then go back out in the world so that you can deal with that better. If you are constantly being attacked, if you are constantly being judged, or you feel that way, then having time where you can go and feel like you're not being attacked, not being judged, so that you can collect your thoughts to then face it again is not a bad thing.
And I understand that, but by the time you're in college, and safe spaces are particularly what we're seeing crop up in colleges and universities now. By the time you're in college, you're an adult legally. You're expected to be able to behave as an adult and face the world as an adult. The point of being able to handle new ideas that may be scary to you should be already imprinted in you through the education system up to that point. We shouldn't be sending adults out into the world and then telling those same adults of, yep, you're now responsible for your own taxes, living on your own, paying your bills because you are legally recognized as an adult, while at the same time coddling them, saying, hey, these ideas are scary, but it's okay if you're ignorant of them because we'll coddle you through that new idea. You should, again, primary education up through grade 12 should be focused on preparing people for being able to interpret the world. And then college should be exposing you to all of those scary ideas that you are now able to interpret. And the safe space undermines that basic premise, which I think is... Now, Bertrand Russell obviously wasn't talking about that 100 years ago, but I think that's why I bring up safe spaces as an example, because education is supposed to prepare you for being able to interpret information.
All right. And so everything you said is correct for the most part. There are certain aspects of what you said that I want to push against, and the first one being, because it was one of the first parts of your argument,
go ahead.
Is that by the time you are in university, you are legally an adult and you should be ready to face dissent. But in all reality, people aren't. I mean, the moment you turn 18 isn't like a switch gets flipped and you are now an adult, except, I mean, you are legally, but you...
It's not a flip of the switch. It's a transition period.
The point... It's an arbitrary point.
Let me rephrase it. When you start living on your own, you're no longer under the protection of your parents, at least not entirely. Your parents are still there. And if you need someone to be supportive, that is the role of your parents, is for them to help you with...
But what if your parents aren't supportive and have never been supportive?
Sure, in which case you need to find it elsewhere, and where you get that may differ. Generally speaking, that comes from the community or friend group that you involve yourselves with, not the educational institutions. You can find friends at the educational institutions, but the educational institutions themselves should not be protecting you from particular ideas, because when you're out in the world and interacting with, be it nature or with other people that have no idea who you are, they're not going to coddle to your specific needs or specific wants, because they don't know who you are. They don't know what those needs are. So you need to be able to face anything that the world can throw at you. And that's what college and higher education is supposed to be doing, is better preparing people for what is going to be thrown at them, as well as the particular focus on a particular trade.
Yeah. So think about an example. You talked about parents being a support group, or creating your own support group if you can't find it there, and then you go off to college and you are living on your own. Now, I will use the example of someone that I know. This is a real person, but I won't use any names nor real locations.
Sure.
But this person was through high school. He was what a lot of people would consider like a jock and all around, just like manly man. He played a lot of football. He was good at it. He took shot classes and all of that stuff. And he went to university. Now, while he was at university, he discovered something about himself. He discovered that he was definitely more attracted to men than he was to women. And this guy decided he wanted to come out about it. And in the process, he was shunned by his entire previous his support group. His parents, his family, who were conservative Christians, basically disowned him. And then he went to college, and in the process, there were a lot of people there that they couldn't disown him because he was there, but walking around and being called a fag at every single place that he went, and being essentially shunned by that, and having a space for him to get away from that isn't just his empty bedroom, is really important. And unfortunately, this person that I knew took his life because he could not feel safe anywhere. He felt like no matter where he went, he was being attacked.
And I'm sorry to hear that, but at the same time, that's kind of what I've been saying in terms of what education should prepare you to be able to do. Education should be able to prepare you to face the world. And while he, let's say, didn't know something about himself until he got out into the world and learned about that, the whole purpose of primary education should be preparing you to be able to face those things. Same thing from your parents, is preparing you to face the difficulties of the world. A lot of times that is the difficulties of society. And society, unfortunately, changes very, very slowly, particularly in terms of just inherent biases or dislikes for particular groups of people. And people can be really, really ruthless. We should help those that are in that position of being, let's say, oppressed or insulted or looked down upon or viewed as being lesser for particular traits that they have. We should, as a society, be more sympathetic to that. The question, I think, is how much of our efforts do we want to take to help protect people from the society versus make an effort to fix the society? And I think that by just protecting people or allowing them to be protected, it prevents us from solving the problem, because it allows people to avoid the problem. The way that you fix a problem is by facing it, not by avoiding it. And now don't get me wrong. There should be support groups, and there should be laws protecting particular people to make sure that there aren't hate crimes, for instance. And in this case, I don't know if there were hate crimes involved with that. The way that it ended,
calling someone a faggot is a hate crime.
No, it's not. Not in the United States.
Well, oh, I guess legally not, but uh, yeah,
Calling
I
to
feel
harm
like it
someone
should
or
be.
actively harming someone
Yeah.
is a hate crime, but and that should be maintained illegal. Hurting people should be illegal.
Hmm.
Exposing people to ideas or expressing those ideas is something that people need to be able to face. And while it can have very, very negative consequences, I think that that's more of a failure of the educational system to
Hmm.
preparing them for being able to face those, or from the parents of being able to face the hardships of life. And there should also be, at least in an ideal world, support groups where people can talk about those things. But I
Hmm.
don't think that that's on the side of the educational facilities. Educational facilities should be focused on exposing you to more ideas rather than protecting you from ideas. And I bring that up in this example because, you know, the idea of someone hating someone that's a homosexual, look, that's a reality that is in a majority of
Hmm.
the world right now.
Yeah. So
He's in a
I'm not
country.
saying that
Go
a
ahead.
safe space is the solution. I don't think that safe spaces are the solution to hatred. It's not that to fix hatred we must ban hatred. It is. I feel like and personally I guess I have never been to a safe space put on by a university or anywhere else.
Sure.
I I don't actually know what they are like inside, but in my mind, the ideal version of a safe space serves as the entry point for someone that feels like they are unsafe no matter where they go. They are shunned no matter where they go. And the safe space acts as a place where they can go, collect their thoughts, talk to someone that has been through what they've been and can offer strategies on how to deal with it. Not that come here and you are protected from everything and you never have to leave. No, come here, feel safe, talk through what's going on, talk to people that have experienced the same thing, share strategies, get that support so that when you go out into the world, that hate, as you said, society takes a long time to change. So the hate isn't going to just disappear, but
Yep.
having strategies to deal with it and talking through that in a space that you know you're safe from. I thinking through just psychology. I mean, personally, I go to a psychiatrist and a psychologist both on a semi-regular basis, and I mean, I feel like it's a very safe space when I go there. But I know that that has not always been the case for psychology and psychology and psychiatry. Looking back 50 years or 100 years, you go to the psychologist, and I mean, parts of the world were even
And a lot of
more than
times
others.
there were, conversion therapy, particularly for
Exactly.
homosexuals.
Lobotomies, conversion therapy.
Uh,
There was a lot that happened
You can't.
that,
People were afraid of being themselves for the negative consequences that could have come out of it, and the safe space is a way of allowing people to be themselves with others that are sympathetic to their position
mhm,
and learn how to deal with it. And
right.
in
That
that,
is my vision of what an ideal safe space would be. Once again, I don't know if this is what safe spaces are right now because I've never made use of one. I've
sure.
never been to one.
Sure. And I have no problem with that idea as a safe space in a place where people can go basically as a support group, because that's kind
Mhm.
of what you're describing is not necessarily a safe space, but a support group. And there's nothing wrong with having support groups. That's learning how to deal with a particular issue out in the
Mhm.
world. So you are still learning. I think that safe spaces, at least in my mind, in my interpretation of them, is you are being protected from outside influence as opposed to a support group, which is learning how to face those outside incidences.
Okay. So yeah, I completely agree that people should not be able to hide from dissenting opinions forever, and they should never be able to. They
People should learn how to face the problems
yes,
rather than learn how to be protected from the problems. And
yes.
uh,
Well, so they can face the problems while also being protected from them. There are strategies that can be implemented that say, go out, talk to them, talk to the people,
you
or
and you can learn
face
how
the
to
opinion.
avoid particularly bad situations.
You avoid situations and how to, I guess, work against it. So, like I think of it as almost like self-defense, where if someone is attacking you, then if you have never learned anything about self-defense, then you are very like likely to be majorly hurt. You are very likely to get hit in the wrong spots. If you don't know what parts of your body to protect, then you're going to be very hit hard by no matter what it is.
Sure.
If someone is attacking you and you know self-defense and you're using self-defense techniques like protecting important parts of your body, you are able to take the same hits, but with lesser impact. And kind of, I guess it's not perfect because each hit is like a dissenting opinion, but
no, and it's an interesting analogy that you bring up, particularly for me, because I have training in self-defense techniques. I have taught self-defense techniques for a couple of years in martial arts. So I know exactly what you mean. And honestly, one of the first things that we try to teach is how to get out of a situation. But that being said, we teach people both how to get out of a situation as well as how to protect yourself should you be put into the situation. And I think that it's a difference between a support group and a safe space. Again, in my mind, at least in my interpretation of what they are, a support group tells you how to avoid negative situations as well as how to face them when they come up, as opposed to a safe place, which is where I can just go and never have to face these situations. And when you're out in the world, that's something that will eventually happen.
And I guess there's a difference in what I think of when I think of a safe space and what you think of, because in my mind, a safe space serves also as a support group and a resource center, really. So that is I guess goes down that I guess is the reason that we're having dissent here is
a lot of what we're discussing is exactly what is a safe space, and we've already gone pretty far away from
the original quote.
What the original quote.
So I to bring things back.
Yeah.
I will say that setting the tone of any education to be like to say that you do not need to deal with dissenting opinions. You should be safe from anyone that disagrees with you. That's completely wrong.
And
I agree.
That's what he's talking about. That is making you stupid. Is number one, avoiding the ideas that you find scary or avoiding dissenting opinions, but also when you're teaching for the purpose of indoctrination and avoiding teaching someone so that they're hyper-focused on something and can't do anything else except for what you're teaching them, that's where education makes you stupid.
Yeah, when you're taught what to think and not how to think, that's what makes you stupid from education.
I agree. And as for men are born ignorant, it's people are born without inherent knowledge. We have to teach that knowledge, and more importantly, particularly in primary school, I think people need to learn how to learn and how to interpret the world. And once they know that, then education makes them smart because they know how to interpret that information.
Yeah. So, and to look at, or I want to take apart what you just said, not so much in the context of what we have been talking about, but maybe as the next thing to dig into. You said you quoted the quote. You said men are born ignorant, not stupid, and then you said people are. You use the term people.
Yes.
Really, I don't remember the exact words, but when you think of this quote and you hear the term men in there, do you think biological males, or do you think in terms of mankind where it's technically men, women, and anything in between?
For quite a long time, at least the way that I interpret it, when in past contexts people have used the word men, they refer to mankind. All humans, not specifically men. And I realize that it depends on what point in history you're talking about, but while I understand it to be saying men are born stupid, I interpret it as people are born stupid. And I understand that there are people out there that don't have a full appreciation for the fact that men means humanity.
So, but thinking about this quote in specific, does it, if you were to find a feminist website, and I'm going to talk about generally American, the extreme feminism where it's not so much equality, but like women need more than men
that women
to make
are significantly
up for
better than men. Yeah, feminazis.
Sure. And like if one of them were to pull out this quote and use it and say, "Look at a man finally said,
a man
finally
recognizes
knew
that men are
something."
stupid.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect.
What would your thoughts be on that?
I think that's a perfect example of extreme feminism, how I would refer to as feminazism, where women are saying all men are bad, women are always better than men. If they pull it out and say, oh, all men are born stupid and men have realized this 100 years ago, here's an example of that, I would call it to the second part of they are made stupid by education. And when you, particularly with feminist extremism, if you're under that form of education where you're in an echo chamber, where you're only around other people who agree with you and any dissenting opinions are considered bad, that's a form of education that makes you stupid because you're not listening to other ideas or contrary ideas. So it's by definition, if that happened, missing the second half of that quote.
Yeah. So fair. And I have to say, honestly, when I first heard this quote, I did not know it was Bertrand Russell. And when I first heard it, it was in the context of you quoting a separate a feminist on Twitter. This was the quote after that. So when I first heard
when we were deciding what quote to discuss.
Yes. My first thought was, okay, this is a feminist on Twitter.
You thought it was a feminist talking point.
Yeah,
as opposed from Bertrand Russell.
And my first thought was that there is a point being made here about men are born ignorant and not stupid, and then they're made stupid by education.
Mm-hmm.
And my first thought of, after kind of thinking the context, was a extreme feminist putting this out there, talking about biological males and the like education making them stupid, was kind of saying men historically and forever have been the quote unquote smart ones, and I don't agree with this, but or the ones in control, I should say. So they set the laws, they set what's being taught, they do the education, or in cases where the females were doing the education, the females were being told
because
how to educate.
Frequently females were okay. That's interesting. That for a long time females were the ones that were teaching children, and
but the ones making telling them what to teach were really the men in power.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so that was what I first thought of before finding out this was Bertrand Russell from a lot longer ago.
It's an interesting view on the quote.
So really, it gets back to your earlier point about an echo chamber. And so how I read into this originally was that they are made stupid by education, really saying they are made stupid by having these young men being put into a education system taught by older men, and you, I guess, don't have dissent.
The idea of an echo chamber. That you're made stupid by being in an echo chamber, which educational facilities can frequently become.
Yeah, and so that's how I first read this as not Bertrand Russell from, I don't know when he exactly said this, but
from a
potentially 150 years ago.
You interpreted it from a feminist perspective, and honestly,
yeah,
like that's kind of where I went similarly. Is that education, an example of education making you stupid, is education that comes from an echo chamber, which is why I brought up safe spaces and why we spent such a long time talking about safe spaces, is because they can become an echo chamber, and you want to avoid having things become an echo chamber so that people are not made stupid by education.
Correct. To kind of, it feels like we want to tie these points together and kind of come to a conclusion. Is I agree, echo chambers are bad. People need to be exposed to dissenting opinions, but that doesn't mean that they need to always be exposed to dissenting opinions. Safe spaces and support groups should exist to help them handle being exposed to these things, but not protect them always from them. Sometimes to learn how to handle something, you need to be protected from it for a short while
you need to be exposed to it in a controlled setting, which is what support groups are for, is to be able to help people be exposed to ideas or exposed to new methods of facing the world in a controlled setting where people can handle it more readily. And I also agree that having support groups is something good, particularly for people who have to carry more of an emotional burden because of their differences from society, that it's more than normal. So I think we agree on a lot of the sentiments, even if we disagree on some of the interpretations of it.
Yeah. And I mean, the listeners are always welcome to comment and talk about if they have experience with the reality of safe spaces. If my, I guess, aspirational dreams of what they are not true, and if what you're saying is more true,
or if my interpretations are also completely backwards, let us know if you have more firsthand experience with them. We're really curious, and I mean, we obviously, Cass and I obviously disagree with a lot of the interpretations, but we're still trying to talk it through. So be in the comments, be nice to each other, but we're very curious of what you have to say.
Yeah, we definitely support dissenting opinions, and we want to hear them. But in any case, attacking someone,
express your ideas. Don't attack people's ideas, not people.
Correct. Yeah.
So with that, I think this went a lot longer than these deep quote episodes. I guess we intend to have them go, but this ended up being a pretty good deep discussion. So once again, the quote is, "Men are born ignorant, not stupid. They are made stupid by education," from Bertrand Russell. All right. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the comments.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to this discussion. Your interest really means a lot to us. If you want to help support this podcast and our goal of sparking discussions and bringing people together, check out how to contribute in the description. Happy deeping!
The content of this podcast does not reflect the views and opinions held by anyone involved. We will frequently be playing the devil's advocate strictly for the purpose of exploration of ideas and not as an endorsement of any subsequent action. We condemn all acts of violence other than those of self-defense against physical harm.